Hi, hope you all are warm. This is Dave Harper reviewing Joy Hall's excellent paper about Psalm 2 and Psalm 110, informing Jesus as high priest in Hebrews. Hall opens by emphasizing the unique nature of Hebrews Christology, describing Jesus' role as high priest. Founding this largely on Psalm 2 and Psalm 110 in the Old Testament, and explaining that Jesus obviates any need for future sacrifice or human priesthood. This has implications to affirm believers' confidence that because of Jesus' already finished and always ongoing work, we may have faith and courage to persevere to the end. Hall also explains there are intimations of Jesus' priesthood in the Gospel and Acts, though these are more subtle and largely allusions often to Psalm 2 and 110. Allusions to Jesus' priesthood through Psalm 2 and 110. Now, it's interesting to me that his priesthood is based upon the order of Melchizedek, meaning my king is righteousness, or the king of righteousness, rather than the Levitical priest tradition, because they were sinful and flawed, and Melchizedek, a semi-divine figure, provides a more appropriate foundation. Only Psalm 110:4, Hall explains, clearly predicts a bright future for the priesthood in the Old Testament. In the New Testament, Christ is primarily characterized as king rather than high priest, a fact which Hall notes may have been influenced by the Jewish national focus on the anointed one as a coming king, which may have obscured what Jesus may have been revealing about himself as a priest in the Gospels. I'd like to know more about this point, specifically whether Hall is suggesting human bias toward kingship rather than priesthood in the part of the New Testament authors, which might have resulted in a somewhat unbalanced framework by those authors. I'd like to know more about that. I think it's interesting. Later in the paper, she explains, while there's no direct discussion of the priesthood of Jesus outside the book of Hebrews, there are many hints and suggestions that point to the fact that Jesus fills this messianic office. Understanding that Jesus is a high priest is a critical thing for Hall, and it's going to fight me a little bit, sorry, but I want to show you a clip from her paper. Here we go. Excellent. Because Jesus is the high priest, believers should encourage each other in the pursuit of the faith so that no one fails to enter the promised rest of God. The life of faith is not an individual, but a community affair. Believers should come to the throne of grace with confidence in time of need because Jesus is high priest. A critical aspect of this effort is teaching of the priesthood of Jesus. The use of these texts in the book of Hebrews to establish the priesthood of Jesus provides strong evidence that the same implication is present in the words of Jesus in the Gospels and those of the apostles in the book of Acts. The priesthood of Jesus therefore deserves a prominent place in our theological framework. A few things I found to be interesting centered mostly around Melchizedek and that enigmatic figure of the Old Testament in Genesis. I would like to see perhaps a word study on Salem. He's the king of Salem, so the king of righteousness and the king of peace. Jerusalem, Salem is often thought to be just the last part of Jerusalem, and so it occurs 3 times in the Old Testament, and it has linkage with shalom and integral wholeness, but hallowed gives it its own set of definitions, and I think it's an interesting word and could provide an interesting word study. In Genesis 14:18, Melchizedek brings bread and wine. It's anachronistic of me to say so, but I thought that might be an early allusion to communion or Christ, some symbolism there that is very interesting to me. Of course, it would not have been intended by the original author. The number of scholars who view Melchizedek as semi-divine is pretty high, and I would like to see more of that explored. I guess he's a very enigmatic figure in the Old Testament. There's not a lot said, but his divinity or semi-divinity is of interest to me, and I think maybe a fuller picture of Melchizedek might emphasize Jesus' ministerial role as high priest, as the presence of God, as the source for wholeness, as our abundant provision. So Joy, your paper was a joy to review, no pun intended. Thanks so much. I look forward to seeing you all again in warmer weather.